here's our host, Chris Pierce.
Good morning, Omaha, and we welcome you back to Viewpoint Television. I'm Chris Pierce. I'm your host for the next 30 minutes as we begin our new season. You know, we're happy to announce that Viewpoint with Chris Pierce will be a weekly feature right here every Sunday morning at 11:30, and we're honored to be part of your week. You know, we've undergone some extraordinary transformations in recent months. In addition to a new day and a new time, we're now in the new KPAO studios with our brand new television set. You know, we couldn't have achieved all this without the great support of our team and their networks. A big thank you to our floor director, Mike Austin, who gave up garage space and put his extensive tool shop to work and created our news desk. And a big thank you to Donna Robertson, who does our research and our camera work, who just happened to have family that could create this great wall we have behind us. A big thanks to E&E Exhibit Solutions for creating and donating our set. Now it's time to start the show. On Thursday, Mayor Jean Stothert vetoed 4 budget resolutions that were added by the Omaha City Council when it passed the 2015 Omaha budget back on August 26. The first was Councilman Gray's resolution to provide $40,000 for exhibits during the College World Series for the Great Plains Black History Museum. In the mayor's veto statement, she says, the city already provides funding sources to support the museum. In 2013, the museum received $12,900 in turnback tax funds. I would hope the museum will again be a beneficiary of this program. It seems that the brunt of the mayor's veto stamp was felt by Councilman Chris Jeremy, in which 3 of his budget resolutions were vetoed. But the mayor, vetoing $175,000 in library funding for materials, the mayor stated that the Omaha Public Library budget is slightly up from 2014. The director has the ability to spend more on materials as long as he decreases spending in other line items. Now, Councilman Jeremy also sought $50,000 to fund a sustainability consultant. In the mayor's statement, she remarked, the planning department's sustainability program is evident in the current and planned programs. I have confidence that our planning department to incorporate sustainability in all aspects of development without the advice or the expense of a consultant. Now finally, Councilman Jeremy championed the long debated position of the bicycle pedestrian coordinator, the commonly named Bike Czar, by folding it into the Complete Streets Active Living Manager, which would cost $60,000. In her veto statement, the mayor said the private funding that created this position is expiring. In its place, I've created an active living advisory committee and will name a current city employee as the balanced transportation coordinator. And it is unnecessary to create and fund a new position in the Public Works Department. There's a vacant position in the Planning Department that is already budgeted for 2015. Now, Councilman Pete Festerson's budget resolution to increase the number of police by 8 and provide more funding for street maintenance was the only one that passed that escaped the mayor's veto stamp. In her statement on the Festerson resolution, she states, public safety is my #1 priority. The City Council's actions will not increase the sworn strength beyond our goal of 840 officers for 2016. It simply allows the chief and me to move even faster to achieve our goals. Now, earlier in the meeting, Councilman Gary Granat submitted his own resolution to increase the police force by 8 officers, but was forced to pull his amendment because, in his words, don't have the 5 votes needed. Now the budget will head back to the City Council in an effort to override the mayor's vetoes, with each veto needing to survive a supermajority of 5 council members. Joining us will be 2 members of the Omaha City Council that will try to override those vetoes on Tuesday. Councilwoman Aimee Melton, who represents Northwest Omaha, and Councilman Ben Gray, who represents North Omaha. A little bit later, we'll be joined by Nebraska Taxpayers for Freedom, Doug Kagan, and self-professed political wonk and talk radio host Jeremy Aspen. The city budget, vetoes, and what happens next when we come back right after a quick word from the National Safety Council of Nebraska.
Listen, I think it's time we had that talk. Now, I can tell that you really like this girl, but I think you kids move way too fast. I just need to know that you're using protection.
Dad.
So buckle up, son. And no sex!
And welcome back to Viewpoint. We're discussing the city budget, mayoral vetoes, and overrides. I know it's exciting. But to help us out understand this, and 2 of the people that are going to make this decision, first of all is Councilwoman Aimee Melton. She represents the 7th District, which is Northwest Omaha, and by chance, this is only her 2nd budget that she's had to go through. And our other guest is a budget veteran and obviously a television veteran, our good friend, Councilman Ben Gray, who represents District 2, which is in North Omaha. So thank you both for coming. I know it was a little bit short notice. considering that the news of the veto just came out yesterday.
Yes.
Of course, I think we heard grumblings before that there was something going on.
Right.
But what I wanted to talk about is, first of all, I guess, what is the relationship? I'll start with you, Aimee. What is the relationship between the city council and the mayor right now?
Well, actually, I think the city council and the mayor have an excellent relationship, especially in comparison to the former administration that was in before Mayor Stothert. The one thing about Mayor Stothert, she has met with council members. I know that she meets with Councilman Gray, Councilman Festerson on a regular basis as the president and vice president of the council. I meet with her on a regular basis, and I know many of the other council members do. So when we received the budget, really there were no surprises in the budget because she had made us aware of what her thoughts were, what her plans were, and what she was thinking all along the way. So by the time we got the budget, it was what we thought it was going to be, and I think that makes a great relationship.
You know, and Ben, you know, she mentioned you are the council vice president, so you've got probably a little more access to the mayor than maybe some of the other council members because of your leadership position. Do you agree? Do you think the mayor's got a pretty good relationship with the council?
I think we have a good relationship. I think there's a healthy bit of tension there sometimes, and I think that's good when you're in politics and when you're trying to everybody's trying to do the right thing here. There's no question about that. But I think there's a healthy bit of tension that exists sometimes between some of us who are on the council and the mayor. I was not happy to find out through the grapevine that there was a tax cut coming.
Okay.
So, and I made my feelings known about that.
But do you think you probably knew it was coming at some point because that was one of her campaign promises?
There had been.
I mean, that's one of the things she said she was going to do.
There had been kind of nuances that made me believe that something like that was getting ready to happen.
Did you think it was more for the restaurant tax, or were you not surprised that it was the property tax rather than the restaurant tax?
I didn't know which one it was going to be. I just knew that there were kind of the rumblings out there that something like that was going to occur, and that created some tension. But the tension is not always bad. Debate is not always bad as long as it's kept respectful.
Okay.
But there should be debate. We should discuss these very difficult issues. It's important that everybody's thoughts be talked about and discussed and evaluated and so forth. So, you know, there's a little bit of tension there, but that tension is healthy, but the relationship is good.
Well, let me ask you this, because you know the mayor submits her budget, and then there's a public hearing for the public to come in, and that's usually 2 weeks before the vote, before you guys vote, correct?
Right.
Do you guys think some of the amendments, the resolutions that were submitted by the city council, were a reflection of that public hearing, Aimee?
Well, it appeared that way because the majority of the people that came down and talked about the libraries, talked about the Black History Museum, and of course the bike coordinator. And then we saw, the resolutions that were passed virtually mirrored what the majority of the people who came down.
Now, one of the things, let me get your take, because one of the things that I took away from the public hearing and from Scuttlebutt and blogs and things, that people were saying, 2%, when you come down to it, it's not much. I'd rather give my money so I can do the libraries, and some of the other things that need more money. Did you get that from your constituents that this tax cut's not that big a deal? Keep your tax, but fund these other things. Or was the tax in your district anyway? Was the tax cut a big deal for you?
In my district, the majority of the emails I got from my constituents were, please support the mayor's budget and please support the tax cut. And I understand, even for the majority of the people in my district, maybe that tax cut isn't that big of a deal monetarily when you're talking about the amount of money that's saved. But for a number of people, it is. When I walked Keystone, there were a number of people that are on Social Security and a very limited income. And the thing they told me is, Aimee, if I'm going to vote for you, you have to promise me that there's not going to be an increase in taxes, and you need to do what you can to try and cut those taxes. Okay. So even that little bit is going to make a big difference to a lot of people. In addition, I also think Omaha is taking the lead on saying we need tax cuts. And so with the mayor cutting this tax, what I'm hoping is that'll lead, hopefully, the state, the county, and others to say, yes, with some of these excess property valuation money, let's use that, and instead of spend it, let's give it back to the people.
Now, Ben, I want to bring up, because I was at the vote during the city council meeting, and one thing that I thought that you'd stated, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this tax cut really didn't affect your constituency all that much because many of them are renters,
Yes.
And I think one of the statements you said, if you think you rent and that savings we passed on to you, I've got another thing for you.
Yes.
Okay, but and I agree, that's just fact. You know, you're only affected if you own property. You only get a benefit. But one of the things I want to give you a little bit of time, one of the things you talked about is there's a need to discuss tax policy.
Policy.
Can you go into that? Because you're not talking about tax cuts and cutting tax. What are you talking about when you say that?
I'm talking about tax reform. And that starts at the state level. For people may not recognize it or may not know it, but we leave somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 billion with a B. More than $3 billion on the table in sales tax exemptions.
Now, are you talking about the sales tax, which was it last session, maybe the session before, where the governor wanted to get rid of some of those sales tax exemptions?
Yes.
This is what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Okay.
But I'm talking about, Councilmember Pauls introduced several bills to try and address that. And when you leave that kind of money on the table, I mean, we have more sales tax exemptions in the state of Nebraska than any other state in the union. We ought to be doing better than that, and we ought to be looking at tax policy as opposed to tax cuts. When you're talking about tax cuts, that always goes up and down. You saw that in the last city council, where we had cut so deeply that some of our departments were really on the brink of non-existence.
Okay. Hold that right. We're going to get back to that,
okay.
And we're going to talk about some predictions of what happens with veto when we come right back.
50 years!
The Boys and Girls Club of the Midlands
have been helping kids like me.
Like me.
Like us. For just $30 a year, I can get
a healthy meal,
homework help,
exercise,
a safe place to stay after school, everything. At one of our 8 clubs. My name is Janelle.
And I am the Boys and Girls Club.
The Boys and Girls Club. We are the Boys and Girls Club! Like us on Facebook at BGC Midlands. Cox will donate $1 to the Boys and Girls Club.
Do you know about 211? It's help for an elderly relative or a troubled teen, family counseling, or job training. Instead of hunting for phone numbers, dial 211. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, talk to someone who will find the local information you need. United Way and its statewide partners want you to get connected and get answers. Dial 211 or go online at ne211.org.
Welcome back. We're talking about the city budget. We're talking about vetoes. We're talking about tax policy. We're talking about all sorts of stuff with our guest, Councilwoman Aimee Melton and Councilman Ben Gray. But I want to finish up with you, Ben, because you were on a good tangent, because we want to talk about tax policy, and you're talking about tax exemptions.
Yeah, and you said tangent. Amy laughed. I did, no, but tax policy. I think if we engage in changing tax policy or adjusting tax policy with eliminating some of those exemptions, then we can really do something about property tax, and we don't have to worry about it again. But the way it exists right now, what we do is we go up and down with tax cuts, up and down, depending on who the administration is, depending on where we are and so forth. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really get much accomplished. And if we change the policy, if we address tax reform, then I think we've got something to work with, as opposed to the tax cutting that we do that really doesn't do what it really needs to do for the people in our community.
You know, Amy, I find it interesting. Unfortunately, I live 300 feet outside the city limits, so I'm a county taxpayer. And what really struck me is the county raised my property taxes while the city lowered its property taxes. Explain to some of us that live in a county, that live in the ETJ and we got to follow all those other rules, the contradiction.
Well, I'm not sure that I can defend the county on their tax increase. I can tell you, if I was on the county board, I wouldn't have voted for a tax increase. And I support decreasing the tax. And so I'm glad that Mayor Stothert is taking the lead. And hopefully the constituents that live in the county will keep that in mind in the next election when they're voting for their county board member.
All right, so I want to talk about specifically some of these vetoes. I had a few questions. First of all, Ben, your resolution that basically you wanted to provide $40,000
for the Great Plains Black Museum
to do some exhibits during the.
They already do the exhibits, and what I'm saying is the city ought to support some of those. They support Western Heritage, they support Jocelyn, they support the zoo. There ought to be some dollars for the Great Plains Black Museum. They don't support, in most instances, we don't support anything that relates to people of color. And I think that has to be on the table at some point. And I just thought 40,000 for exhibits that they already do that have a benefit, especially during the College World Series. I thought that we ought to be supporting that.
Well, you know, in my intro, I mentioned, you know, the mayor said that, you know, they are a benefit of turnback dollars, that there's not a reason for them not to be able to benefit from that again. So, you know, if they're going to be getting turnback dollars and 40,000, do they need all those dollars?
There's no guarantee that they're going to get turnback dollars. Okay. And the turnback dollars are there's always more need than there are dollars that are available.
And that
we're
happens
trying
everywhere.
to get to some other and we're trying to help some other people to build as well. So they've been there on a number of occasions, and we would like the opportunity to reduce them so that we can put someone else, you know, so that we can give someone else some dollars to move forward with their projects as well. So, you know, and plus this ought to be something that the city does. This shouldn't be something that ought to be relegated to the turnback tax, in my judgment.
You know, Amy, I got a quick question. Funding more police. There were actually two resolutions. The first one was by former police officer Gary Granat, who wanted to fund 8 more officers. Somehow he didn't have the votes for that, but somehow we had the votes for Pete Festerson, who did the exact same thing and added dollars for street repair. Was there a priority change in you know? And I know we talked off camera about some of the situation, but right. I just don't understand why Gary's wouldn't have passed, by adding more officers.
Well, Gary's resolution was a resolution to the original budget that the mayor presented. He wanted more money for that. Pete Festerson's resolution came as a result of the extra $800,000 that we discovered. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, we were told by the county assessor that the property valuations were much higher. So we had basically an extra $800,000 that wasn't accounted for in the budget.
Now, is that because of the annexation, or is this unrelated?
No, it's completely unrelated to the annexation.
And Gary's proposal was to reduce the tax cut. That was
correct.
The big thing.
Oh, okay. So, yes,
he did it by reducing.
In addition to that, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, but he was amending the original budget to where Pete Festerson was amending my resolution dealing with the $800,000. He said we now have extra money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here's how we should use it. Okay.
Correct.
So let me ask you, with the 1 minute we've got left over, let's talk about predictions. First of all, Ben, are any of these not going to be overridden?
Probably. If I were going to predict, I would say for sure the library is going to be overridden. Mm-hmm. I'm very skeptical.
And that's probably because Rich Paul supported it the first time.
Yeah, I'm very skeptical about the rest, but I'm still going to push hard for the Black Museum.
Okay, Amy?
Actually, I would have to agree with Ben. In fact, I think I've agreed with everything
stop.
Ben has
we
said
don't agree
today.
We don't agree on this show here. There's two sides to everything. Go ahead.
Especially about tax reform, Ben.
Right.
We really need to have some discussions when we leave. I think I would agree. I support giving money to the Black History Museum. I think my concern is I would rather give it to rehab the building that the Callaway family owns. So I mean, I think next year we probably need to take some more time to look at that. I don't think it's going to pass. I think the funding for the library, from my understanding, is the only one.
Okay, well, I want to thank both our guests, Councilman Ben Gray and Councilwoman Aimee Melton, who in just a few actually 2 days, are going to decide whether or not the resolutions that they passed a couple weeks ago is going to pass and override the mayor's veto. With that, we'll be right back.
Selling cookies is about
the big picture. You have to have a goal. A big goal.
Something you and your team
want to do in the world. We choose where the money goes. A trip, an adventure, helping people out.
Helping a lot of people out.
And about the money, we
are responsible for it.
Handling it, managing it, tracking it, doing great things with it.
This is business.
Girl business.
The biggest girl-run business
in the world.
Did you think this was just about cookies?
Welcome back to Viewpoint with Chris Pierce. I'm your host, of course, the hostess with the mostest, as they say. We just got done with 2 city council members. They're the ones that are going to make the decision. So let's talk to 2 people that try to influence that position. First of all is, let me see, what did I say? He is a political wonk and a talk show host on Coils 1290, Jeremy Aspen.
Thank you for having me. Love being here.
He made me correct it. And then Nebraska Taxpayers for Freedom's president, Doug Kagan. Doug, thank you very much for being here.
Good evening.
I am going to start with you, Doug. I know that you are a watchdog. You guys are a hound dog when it comes to tax policy, when it comes to government spending. And I noticed, and I actually had to go back to the public hearing. You guys, Nebraska Taxpayers for Freedom, supported this budget.
Absolutely, we did.
Is it because of the tax cut, or were there other things in that also peaked and said this is a good place to be going?
There were many reasons, Chris. First of all, there's a percentage property tax cut, and we preferred to see this cut in property tax rates for the people of Omaha rather than to see a cut in the restaurant tax, because the property taxes affect actually the residents who live within the city limits, whereas the restaurant tax affects more people in and outside the city. But there are other points in the budget that we really were endeared with. First of all, the mayor has instituted an internal auditor who will audit every department every year and find places to cut waste and inefficiencies. She managed every department so that all departments, I think, except the police division, were either on budget, no increases in their budget, and some of them were under budget for the coming fiscal year.
Well, let me ask you, Doug, because let me go back to and we talked about this earlier. The tax cut. It was a 2% tax cut. A lot of people were saying, really, that doesn't do anything for me. $20 a year doesn't mean a lot. So why don't you keep, and what we're here, why don't you keep those dollars and fund the library and fund more officers and fund these things? I mean, was the tax cut in your guys' consideration big enough? I mean, did it really make a difference?
It does make a difference.
Or was it more of a symbolic thing? You tell me.
Well, both, really. It does make a difference. It turns the city around, because Mayor Stothert was left with a huge budget gap, lots of overspending. The brakes had to be applied. And this 2% cut applies the brakes, hopefully turning it around so next year we can have another property tax cut. Next year we can have a cut, ratchet down the restaurant tax, etc.
Jeremy, let me ask you, from a political standpoint, this is why I love you on our show. Mayor Stothert made 2 promises. She did promise to cut taxes, but she also talked about getting rid of the restaurant tax. Now let's talk realities. That thing brings in so much money. I mean, it's going to bring upwards of more than $30 million in just a few years that goes, and 80% of that goes to the debt service for the pension, but the rest of it goes to the general fund. Can she politically not at least reduce that?
Yeah, I know. I think at the end of the day, the promises were pretty clear. At the end of the day, there's going to have to be a way to back out the restaurant tax, and if for no other reason, that restaurant tax serves as an opportunity, a different way of taxing. I mean, we could do this sort of taxing in other areas also, and we need to stop that. We need to not have this creative way of funding taxes. If we need to increase our sales tax or something to make up for that revenue.
Well, but you know that the legislature won't allow. We tried.
They have not allowed to do that.
And they're not going to. And actually, we only have a 0.5% left to the max. So would it really generate?
And then it goes to. I mean, it would have to be done by
right.
vote. Also,
right.
Yeah. No, but I think she'll end up having to get rid of that tax. And it's almost. I mean, it's almost healthy for the city to have that restaurant tax. But it was part of a commitment that she'd made. And even this last go around where it wasn't addressed, she got some pushback on it, because it was a very clear message that restaurant tax would be going away.
Doug, could you support, let's say, Mayor Stothert for 2016? For 2015, she cut property taxes as she promised. Would you guys be willing to support to where she doesn't cut property tax again, but she reduces the rate of the restaurant tax. Let's say it's 2% now. Let's say she brings it down to 1.8%, where she's trying to gradually get rid of it. Is that something you support, or would you rather see another property tax?
Well, theoretically, we'd prefer to see a cut in the property tax, but realistically, I think the restaurant tax is not going to disappear in one fiscal year. I think the mayor would probably ratchet it down a certain percentage every year. People are getting just really disgusted with all these nuisance taxes. We have wheel tax, seat tax,
tobacco tax now.
Tobacco tax. They want to have some kind of liquor tax. And all those nuisance taxes add up. And I think people just gripe about it so much that they, symbolically or not, they'd like to see the nuisance taxes go down.
Quickly, before we go, are any of the vetoes that the mayor submitted yesterday, are any of those downright should not be overturned in your mind? I mean, I know you'd rather have none of them, but if you had to pick one that you would say this veto needs to stand, which one would it be?
We'd say go ahead and give them the extra money to the library.
Okay, so you'd be willing to accept that, but some of the others are going a bit too far.
Yes.
Jeremy?
See, I liked Aimee Melton's original plan of putting $400,000 to a contingency fund and $400,000.
But that had to do with the $800,000 that they didn't even know. Quickly before we run out of time, Jeremy, you know the question I was going to ask. I was very, very surprised about the solid, just stalwart support Pete Festerson had for this tax cut. I was very surprised by that. Is there some political motivation behind that?
I mean, everybody knows that Pete Festerson is going to end up running for mayor someday. So yeah, I don't suppose that having a populist viewpoint on something like this would be a
Love
bad
how you
idea.
brought the name of the show into the comments. Appreciate
That's
that.
true, yeah.
Before we go, I want to say thank you to our guests, Aimee Melton, Ben Gray, Doug Kagan, Jeremy Aspen, and remember, everyone has a point of view. Respect it.